Roger, we asked you and Gordon Clark very early on to be one of the first authors as we launched the journal. And pension governance is such a tremendously important topic. So I was delighted as editor that you and Gordon stepped forward and wrote Making Pension Boards Work, the Critical Role of Leadership. You've been studying pension governance for a long time. How would you assess where we stand today with pension governance?
Keith, it's really come such a long way, but the report card is still very, very mixed. I could separate out boards between those probably in the mid-size, but also some large funds that really are struggling with it. I can describe why in a minute. I do find a few funds that are making big progress and act as exemplars, and that's the encouraging side. But overall, I'd say it's a pretty mixed report card.
If you encapsulated the remaining challenges, the big things that need to change in order to elevate the whole governance process, how would you describe those?
Well, really the investment framework is the area that I specialize in, and in that area things have just got so much more complicated. So many more opportunities are there that have to be assessed. That's a very time-consuming process, so the big challenge is with time to start with. On top of that, I would say that there's kind of a problem with pensions generally. Defined benefit in particular has kind of got to a late phase of a sort of super cycle in which solvency stresses and the problems really of inappropriate risk are coming to a form of reckoning. And that is a big challenge. And as I look at it, I think that with those complexities, the governance gap, maybe for some funds, is actually even getting wider. That's to say, any progress being made is being sort of chipped away at because you need much more governance these days. And by the way, this is very much a people and organizational design point. And I don't think we've quite mastered effective organizational design in pension boards yet.
In fact, if I could even back up a little bit further, there has been an ongoing discussion around the whole selection process for board members. And one way in which I've heard the debate posed is those that argue, let's say, that trustees must be representative. In other words, they must be elected by some group of stakeholders and directly represent their interest. I think there's another group that says, well, no, what you really want is a group of people who understand the mission of the organization and have the skill set required to exercise governance in a complex financial institution. How do you deal with that dilemma? Can you make those two things come together somehow?
I think that's the point, that you need to make the two come together. The paper goes into the idea that decision making is made up of a bunch of different types of decisions. And at the heart, there are mission issues where representation is absolutely critical. That's where a pension board comes into its own, is at its best. Recognizing all the stakeholder issues, recognizing the time horizon issues in particular. Now, what boards haven't been very good at is recognizing the limits of their competency at times. And in particular, investment decision making requires a degree of real-time response that boards are just not set up for. And so organizational design in pension boards must accommodate a very streamlined executive function. So the board has a delegation to executives who are effectively the chief investment officer of the fund and have a staff that are able to execute investment strategy on a real-time basis. Now, that separation is happening to some extent in the bigger funds, but many pension boards across the world still seem not to really know the difference between doing things and just getting things done.
But how do we take this to the next level? My personal view is as yours, is that you need that public service element in a board. They can't be there for their own self-aggrandizement. I mean, they have to be there in order to serve the stakeholder group. But on the other hand, it seems to me that the current selection processes are very ad hoc. And I wonder if you've thought about how we can upgrade that process. How do we get a better skill experience set sitting around that boardroom table?
I look in on selection decisions rather than having a lot of influence over them, and I still find that people are kind of caught by the institution itself, and they do tend to look for very diverse backgrounds in pension boards. Again, I think we can accommodate that, providing the role of the pension board is made much clearer, and the focus of that board is really around the creation of a satisfactory organization from a mission point of view. What I think are interesting here is that there is scope for outside independence. So whilst pension boards have been a little bit inclined to keep to their own people by virtue of representation, as you described, there definitely has been a movement towards employing some independent, so the equivalent of non-exec directors in the pensions board area. Why not? You know, my sense is that the talents that are out there could upgrade the board. And I think, again, you know, quite a lot of the innovation is around the board both delegating more and having a higher grade of executive function. Now, most pension funds across the world have very, very limited in-house resource. It's a structure that's kind of the wrong way round, tail wagging the dog. You have very limited amount of in-house capability. You have all these very highly paid third-party organizations, managers through consultants. It is a very strange structure, and I'm looking for progress where funds decide to take more of their resources in-house in their executive function. Again, to have a full-time staff that is focused on the job at hand, which is basically a real-time investment process.
Right. I'm looking for that catalyst because I think you and I have very similar views as to the importance of the governance function and the critical importance of raising its effectiveness. And it seems to me that in many cases, as you described, we're still stuck in this chicken and egg problem where you have a relatively, call it a weak board, which outsources everything. And the question is, how do you change that model short of it blowing it up? Is there some less dramatic way to get change in a board that has been put together using the traditional historical approach?
Sure. I mean, I do see a lot of incrementalism in the way that pension boards have developed. And I've become a little bit jaded with that. My sense is that we do need to have a more stimulated model. One of the issues about pension funds is that they lack the creative destruction, if you will, Schumpeter, of the corporation. They therefore don't have perfect accountability. There's a bunch of things where they're not pressurized in a way that you might have expected. That does, I think, lead to people seeking incremental solutions when something a little bit more significant is asked for. Well, maybe a lot more significant. I would argue, again, along the lines of external impetus from maybe that's non-exec directors, but I think there's also in the investment area, again, my specialized field, the concept of fiduciary management. So the idea that it's very difficult to get a sustainable investment function that is the scale you require. Can you get an alignment of a third-party organization? Now, you introduce some agency issues. I would argue that every pension fund has forms of agency issue with their own staff anyway. So I think that the fiduciary management model, which has been pursued pretty significantly in the Dutch market, now is much more common in the UK market. You see little outgrowths of it in a few other markets. I think it is part of the process of innovation in governance, which I welcome. And I see it as being quite a robust alternative to the way that things are working at the moment.
What about the regulatory process? You look around the world, it seems to me that you have a number of different stances by regulators, all the way from being quite proactive. For example, the Nederlandse Bank, the Dutch regulator, I would put in the proactive camp. ASFA in Australia, I would put into the APRA, into the proactive camp. A lot of the other ones are much more reactive in my sense of they're just following a set of rules and hoping nothing goes wrong. What can we do on the regulatory front?
I'm not holding my breath there. Regulators have a great deal of difficulty with governance. It's very soft. They can regulate a little bit about doing things right, but they can't kind of manage to engineer a situation where governance goes through this upgrade of being a value-creating part of the enterprise. So the sort of soft power that I see regulators influencing pension funds has not really permeated through to a big influence on governance. I think that that's not to say that we haven't had a few instances. I think Australia and the Dutch market are good examples where regulators have made a difference to the marketplace. But as I say, how you get an upgraded governance system, I think that's almost back to individual funds to work out solutions for themselves.
Roger, thank you very much. We'll keep working away. This is a long-term project for both of us. Thank you.